There's something about playing V from Devil May Cry 5 that makes me feel incredibly powerful. As a Cain user myself, it feels liberating to be just as formidable as Dante or Nero whilst sporting a cane. Oftentimes, despite my confidence and carefully curated goth ensembles, I feel like my cane is an instant identifier to others that I am physically weaker than the average person. And while that has actually been quite beneficial for me in a lot of ways, such as allowing others to know at a glance that I need accommodations, it also makes me feel like an easy target. But when I play V, I get the chance to feel formidable in my status as a disabled person. The way he confidently stalks the battlefield, commanding his supernatural companions to fight on his behalf, he retains a sort of regal sense of power. He uses them like pieces on a chessboard, something that is altogether intentional. His attacks all being named after chess strategies. He is in control, and when it's time for him to deal some damage, deal damage he will. The final blow is always carried out through his cane. Yes, his cane offers him support, but it is also an instrument of destruction. He uses what could be considered a symbol of his weakness, and uses it as a strength. In Visions of V, the manga series that served as a tie-in to the game, we learn more about V's origin story, as well as the story behind his stylish, silver, demon-killing mobility aid. From the moment V is created and awakens, the first thing he recognizes, aside from the manifestation of the Demon King Urizen, is his fragility. He tries to crawl away from the horrors he is witnessing and even tries to strengthen himself with demonic power, with no success. He is then saved by Griffin, who mocks him for his weakness, but ultimately admits to the fact that he too will die if he cannot strike a pact with someone. Reluctantly, V agrees, and the two decide to fight together instead of dying alone. And over time, V and Griffin, as well as the other demons he makes these pacts with, end up creating a powerful, meaningful bond. Not far after they make their pact, Griffin is unable to fully protect V in battle, and V drags the both of them into a nearby antique store to hide. The enemy they're fighting follows them inside and nearly kills V, but with a distraction from Griffin, V is given just enough time to smash a display case, grab the cane from inside, and kill the demon with it. But in that moment, before grabbing his cane, V is overcome with frustration and anger at his weakness, at his vulnerability. Grabbing that mobility aid was not giving up. It was making the choice to keep fighting. This hits home with me so hard. The first thing I do every morning, the moment my consciousness returns from the sludgy darkness of sleep, is take inventory of my pain and symptoms for the day. I too started using a cane out of desperation, out of frustration, out of a sheer will to survive. A lot of people think that the moment you choose to rely on a mobility aid, you're giving up. But that couldn't be further from the truth. When I made the choice to start using a cane, it wasn't on a battlefield and I wasn't under attack. At least, not in the traditional sense. It was when I made the decision to get out of the house and get my medication. Leaving the house is something I both crave and fear. I never know when my condition will flare or make me pass out. When I'm home, I know I am always within a few steps of a safe space to crash. But when I'm out there in the world, it feels treacherous. It feels like the entire world was made to not be accommodating to someone like me. It feels like I was an afterthought. If that, it often feels hostile. There are stairs everywhere, not nearly enough seats. The seats that do exist out there in the world are painful for me to sit on. Walking for too long makes my legs burn like they're on fire, and people look at me strangely for limping or twitching or whatever little action they deem as irregular. My cane wasn't behind glass. It was in the middle of an aisle I was stumbling in. I made it to the pharmacy, and while my roommate, who was looking after me, left for just a moment, I felt like I was going to faint. My vision started to blur, and I started swaying. I saw my cane on display, amongst many others, and I snatched it. I gripped it, leaned against it, and I was safe again. Yes, my discomfort didn't vanish, but I now had a tool to help me continue my fight. I now had the support to walk the extra 10 steps to the pharmacy counter. I now had the ability to get my meds as opposed to pitching over and curling up on the aisle floor. I bought it, and when my roommate returned, we decided to try staying out a bit longer instead of fearfully rushing home like we usually did. And the two of us went to a bookstore and chatted and had a good time. My cane gave me the ability to regain a bit of much-craved normalcy. Just like V, I wasn't giving up. I was doing precisely the opposite. Assistive devices in general actually have a theme of being powerful in Devil May Cry 5, as V isn't the only character with a disability. Nero, one of our other playable characters, becomes an amputee at the start of the game, and he's never portrayed as lesser for it. "I could take you with no arms" is a line that Nero barks in the first area of the game. Similarly to V in his mobility aid, his prosthetic is portrayed as powerful rather than pitiful. He switches his prosthetic out with new ones to suit his fighting style throughout the game, and Nero experiences discrimination just as V does. In the tie-in manga I mentioned previously, V experiences ableism in the form of street harassment and assault, as well as other characters doubting him and telling him to sit back while the able-bodied people handle the situation, treating him, well, like a burden. His attackers, muggers to be specific, particularly chose him as their target because of his cane, and they make demeaning comments about his need for a mobility aid. And as for Nero, he gets told he's dead weight by Dante before he has his prosthetic, a line in which enrages Nero. And V, who has more experience with this type of discrimination, has to force Nero to back down from the fight. Here's the thing, the average doctor sees illness and disability as something to be overcome, and when it is incurable, they are of the belief that you aren't trying hard enough. Instead of overcoming their narrow-minded, ableist viewpoint of your situation and giving you tools for better quality of life, they choose to put the blame on you. It's your fault for becoming sick. It's your fault for not trying hard enough. It's your fault despite the fact that managing an incurable illness is a full-time job. So much so that you can't live what is deemed as a normal life, which is, to anyone who can look at the situation objectively, a pretty horrible viewpoint to have. And because modern medicine is placed on an untouchable pedestal and doctors are seen as authority figures, the rest of society follows suit. These messages are taught consciously and subconsciously, causing disabled individuals to internalize this narrative. And V struggles with this too. V battles with accepting that he needs help to achieve his goals. He tries to push himself past his boundaries and suffers every time. There's a chapter in Visions of V where he runs out of spoons and reflects on how frustrating it is to not be able to do anything when recovering. We get to see him discover his limits and actively try to push past them again and again, to no avail. Being hungry makes it harder for him to walk and causes brain fog. And even sitting up on the train for too long tires him out and makes him ache. He takes seats as often as possible to conserve energy, and his companion Shadow actually comes up with a way to help V travel further and faster without expending as much energy. He turns into a shadowy mass that gives V the ability to glide on it. He saw V struggling and created a way to help him. I cannot stress how much this mirrors my own experiences and how validating it was to see a protagonist struggle in the same ways that I do. Well, except for the gliding on a mystical, shadowy mass of demon energy part. If I make a pact with a demon panther that can do this for me, I'll let you know. But there's a lot of nuance with how they depict V's mobility aid usage. He doesn't always need to rely on his cane, and we even see him run or jump at times. Chronic illnesses and disabilities are often dynamic. Every day can look a little different. There's days where someone may need a cane, and other days they may need a wheelchair or even a walker. And there's even days where they might not need a mobility aid at all. Some people even prefer canes that are foldable in the scenario that they might not need it at some point in the day, and thus have the ability to fold it up and put it in their bag until they need it again. In the game, V relies on his cane less than in the manga, which leads me to believe his stubbornness has something to do with it. He doesn't like appearing weak or in need of accommodation, and so when other characters are present, he's often swinging his cane around stylishly, or holding it in his hand but not leaning on it. V often walks without using his cane during gameplay sequences, but heavily relies on it when standing still. I can actually relate to this too, as sometimes walking, despite being more tiring, is easier than standing still for a period of time. Upon standing still for too long, I often feel dizzy, sway, and feel like I need support to continue standing upright. And this difference in his mobility aid usage may also have to do with the difference between crafting a narrative in a manga versus crafting a well-rounded gaming experience. Being a lot more mobile in the game, it is possible that they made him rely a little less on his mobility aid for the sake of the gameplay, restricting the ability to run or making him only walk slowly with his cane like in the manga may have been somewhat incongruous with the gameplay people expect from a Devil May Cry title. According to the Devil May Cry wiki, the game's director Hideaki Itsuno says V was the most difficult character to work on in the game, so much so that the developers kept wondering if adding him was really necessary due to how difficult it was to develop him. But I think they did a great job of presenting a character with a dynamic disability regardless, and added little touches like when you press the taunt button after or during a strenuous fight, he coughs and labors to breathe instead of delivering a witty line like the other characters. Details like this really matter. After he retrieves his cane from behind the glass at the antique store, V stabs the demon to death with his cane before stumbling and collapsing on a nearby couch. God, that's relatable. Literally me after doing one task. He stops to ponder if there is something special about that cane. It was behind glass after all, and it was able to kill a demon that not even Griffin could kill. But Griffin explains to him that it wasn't the power of the cane that was able to destroy a demon. It was V himself. Nico, the game's resident weapons specialist, even wrote this in her notes about V's cane. Quote, "That cane V's always lugging around. I took the liberty of checking it out once, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Sure, the metal's a good conduit for demonic power and all, but there must be more to it than that. Well, who knows? Maybe he does just use it to get around." End quote. The way V and his powers are written into the very fabric of the game and its lore makes one thing loud and clear. Just because V is disabled doesn't mean he can't also be formidable in his own right. But let's make one thing clear. He's not a Supercrip either. Supercrip, being the name of a trope much maligned by chronically ill and disabled people, is when a character is portrayed as being even better than the average person because of their disability. Or their disability is their power in and of itself. Marvel's Daredevil being a pretty famous example, or Deucalion from Teen Wolf. God, he's a terribly written disabled character. Jan Grew, PhD professor at University of Oslo and head of the Department of Special Needs Education, wrote an essay titled "The Problem of the Supercrip: Representation and Misrepresentation of Disability." Grew says this about the phenomenon, quote, "A defining feature of Supercrip narratives is their rationalization and legitimization of impairments as positive attributes," end quote. While V's cane is his weapon and thus a symbol of power, V's disability itself is not portrayed as a positive attribute. Another aspect to the Supercrip is that their power makes up for their disability, allowing them to overcome their condition, becoming the perfect inspirational figure that doesn't make an abled audience uncomfortable. But isn't that good? You might be thinking. Isn't that the goal every disabled person should strive to achieve? To overcome their disability? The answer to that is no, actually. Whether we are born this way or become this way, the narrative and pressure to overcome the ways in which we function is a negative one. It automatically places us as less than others and then pressures us to do the impossible. I can't wake up one day and just decide to not have terrible fatigue and full body pain. And I can't make myself push through it if it is utterly debilitating that day, try as I might. And my inability to do that should not be seen as a failure. And for others, it's not even their disability that holds them back in the first place. It's the ableist structures that are seemingly omnipresent. City planning that doesn't consider us and thus denies us access to entire buildings and areas. The infantilization, the stereotypes, the cruelty and disdain we experience from others. For people like this, it's not their disability they need to overcome. You're asking them to overcome things that are completely out of their control. We can protest and sign petitions, but entire cities and towns aren't going to up and change every building, every street, and every area to be accessible. Oftentimes, even when we do protest, we are ignored by our governments and our communities. And when we try to educate others and tell them not to infantilize us or only view us as inspiration porn, they roll their eyes and plug their ears. Over the years, us disabled folk have been wanting nuance. We are typically portrayed as one extreme or the other. Disability is a problem that inherently spells tragedy and misery, or disability is a non-issue that is both inherently good at all times and serves as inspiration to the able-bodied people around us. The truth is something much simpler. Disability just is. It can and most likely will complicate our lives. We suffer some days and thrive on other days. It is not inherently positive or negative. The way V's disability is portrayed is that he simply is disabled. He is a character with his own wants and dreams and motivations, and his disability is a part of who he is. It's not the source of his power, it's not all he is, but it's a part of him, and it cannot be denied. His powers do not make up for his disability or make him more palatable. In fact, even with his powers, he still can't really keep up with his able-bodied companions at times. But it doesn't make him lesser. It doesn't mean he doesn't have his own strengths and abilities unique to him that the others don't have themselves. He is a valuable asset to the team. And I find that more empowering than a Supercrip any day. You know what else is empowering about V though? He is the first disabled character I've ever seen that is young, dresses alternative, and uses a tricked out mobility aid. Bro is only 2 days old. Come on, tattooed goth baby rep, work. I can tell you though that my goth ass was ecstatic to see him on screen for the first time. In the media, there's barely any disability rep, and when there is, it's depressing, and it's usually an elderly person or a very overly concocted to be relatable type of character. Their design and even their dialogue usually screams, "I'm just like you," in some misplaced sense of trying to normalize disability. And while normalizing disability is important, if you start with that as your only foundation for the character, they're already not going to be relatable. I think where it works for V is they conceptualized him as a whole character first, and his use of a mobility aid is a part of that whole. They didn't just create him to be the disabled guy. They didn't create him to fill a quota. V isn't token. To me, seeing V in all his tattooed gothic glory was the first time I ever saw a disabled person that was actually like me on screen. At the time of my first playthrough, I had only just become chronically ill, and seeing him reassured me that I can still unapologetically be me. I don't have to change how I dress or stop expressing myself through fashion. I don't have to stop getting pierced and tattooed. And at that time, I felt like it opened the door for me to start considering using a mobility aid myself. Seeing V did for me what the hashtag BabeWithAMobilityAid did for others. And he truly embodies, at least for me, the concept of Cripple Punk. For those of you who are unaware, BabeWithAMobilityAid is a hashtag created by Australian YouTuber Annika Victoria. She faced a lot of negativity and backlash when she started looking into using a mobility aid, largely in part due to the fact that she was young. She had a mobility aid store refuse to help her because of it, and doctors discouraged her from using one despite the fact that it would greatly improve her life. She started the hashtag so she could find others like herself, fun, fashionable, and out there living their lives with their mobility aids. The hashtag has been allowing disabled people to empower themselves and each other ever since. It's also really common to see people who use the hashtag sharing videos and Instagram posts of how they custom decorated their mobility aids to be less medical looking and more of an expression of their personality. And if they're not decorating their aid themselves, they are on the lookout for canes made with people like them in mind. NeoWalk is the first brand that comes to mind. The average disabled person also wants to have fun, just like anybody else. Similar to how students need backpack for their functionality, but choose fun designs and decorate them with pins and patches. A lot of disabled people, especially the young ones, want to do the same to their mobility aids. As for Cripple Punk, it's a community and movement that was accidentally started in 2014, and thank God for that. Disabled punk teenager Tyler Truella, who unfortunately passed away in 2017, uploaded a photo of themselves decked out in full punk attire, cane in hand, and looking defiantly into the camera. They tagged it Cripple Punk, not thinking too hard about it at the time, and jokingly wrote, "I'm starting a movement." And start a movement it did. In no time, people were tagging their posts with it, adding it to their selfies, sharing it around. It was met with backlash too, of course. Able-bodied people felt left out and conjectured that it was unfair and not very punk to purposely create a movement that excluded healthy people. To which Truella replied that this is exactly why we need the movement. According to an article on The Verge, Truella said this, quote, "Cripple Punk is exclusively by the physically disabled for the physically disabled. Cripple Punk rejects the good cripple mythos. Cripple Punk is here for the bitter cripple, the uninspirational cripple, the smoking cripple, the drinking cripple, the addict cripple, the cripple who hasn't tried everything. Cripple Punk does not pander to the able-bodied." End quote. Cripple Punk became a term people could use to meet people like them, find people to share and create art with, and work through their trauma, discuss their experiences with ableism. It encourages people to dress loud and proud and not be concerned with fitting in, with upsetting able-bodied people with our otherness. And it's reclaiming the offensive term, cripple, and reconstituting it, turning it into a symbol of power instead of a shameful slur. If there's one character in video games that is a reminder of at least some of the core values of Cripple Punk, it's V. Yes, he wasn't created by the physically disabled for the physically disabled, but he's not there to teach able-bodied people about people with disabilities. He's not there to be palatable. He's not there to be an inspiration. He doesn't want you to feel sorry for him or cry over his struggles. He doesn't need your pity. V isn't seeking recognition or praise from able-bodied people. His fight is for himself. He just is. And as a player, that means a lot to me. I have to do what I can, even if it's only a fraction of what I can do, is a quote from V that really stuck with me. He wants to make decisions for himself and have independence and make meaningful contributions. And he knows that his energy and his power are severely limited compared to the average person. But he's going to try anyway. Playing as V while he was struggling, while my hands and fingers were seizing up and cramping, making it harder and harder to win the battle, really created a unique sort of kinship with the character. We were struggling, but we were struggling together, and it made me want to win even more. And more than anything, I know I say this in every video, but it made me feel seen. Seeing the way Griffin and Shadow help care for V and vice versa was really special too. Griffin, Shadow, and Nightmare all have limitations and struggles of their own. If V is unconscious, so are they. If V dies, they die too. And in battle, each of his companions have their own limit for how long they can fight and expend energy, and need to take time to recuperate. But if you stand by them while they recuperate, they can heal faster. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor for the importance of community and support. Oh, and the fact that Griffin savagely roasts V and V teases him back was pretty great too. Griffin's really out here calling my dude paper, and V talks about cooking him like a rotisserie chicken. What are we really if we don't have friends to roast the hell out of and out of us? Am I right? Thanks for coming to my TED Talk about why I simp for this fictional beautiful goth man from one of my favorite franchises of all time. He's honestly just such a good character, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for being a disabled character that's remembered for more than just his disability. When I see people draw fan art of him or gush about him, I rarely see any inspiration porn type praise or really any talk of him being disabled in a pitying sort of sense. People find him cool and attractive, and people see his cane as a part of him and his ensemble, and I think that's pretty awesome. I have seen the odd fan art that is making a joke out of his disability, and I'll be honest, seeing able-bodied people cosplay him and walk around with a cane for a costume and pretending to struggle with their mobility during photo shoots, it's really weird to me. I don't know how to feel about all that. Anyway, I hope this video was enjoyable and that you got something out of it. If you liked it, feel free to smash that like button and subscribe if you ever want to hear me rant more about nerd shit. I like to talk about asexuality, queerness, disability, and chronic illness through the lens of fiction and pop culture, so if that's your jam, I'd love for you to stick around. But no pressure. We believe in free choice around here. Oh, and I have a Ko-fi account, so if you want to support the channel, you can leave me a tip over at ko-fi.com/DarkTeaTime. Okay, bye! DarkTeaTime out. Peace out, y'all.